Mayday, Mayday. These words were spoken on September 2nd, 1998, over the North Atlantic Ocean, 80 kilometers southwest of Halifax, Nova Scotia. The time was 10:44 in the evening. The aircraft was Swissair Flight 111, a McDonnell Douglas MD-11, carrying 229 people from New York to Geneva. Swissair 111, we have smoke in the cockpit. Request immediate return. We are declaring emergency. That was the voice of Captain Urs Zimmerman. 20 years of experience, thousands of hours in the MD-11. His voice in that transmission is level, controlled, precise. He states the problem. He states the request. He declares the emergency. 40 seconds of perfect professional composure. 14 minutes later, the aircraft hit the Atlantic Ocean at 300 knots. All 229 people died. Somewhere in Washington, D.C., inside a gray concrete building with no exterior signage worth reading, there is a room with no windows. The walls are lined with acoustic padding, dark gray, floor to ceiling. A long steel table runs down the center, surrounded by chairs. On the table, a professional audio playback system. Around the table, headphones. And at one end of the room, locked inside a case requiring 2 separate authorizations to open, a small orange box, dented along one edge, its surface scorched and scratched, sitting under a single fluorescent light. Most people call it the black box. They are wrong about the color, they are wrong about the number, and they have almost no idea what it actually contains. Every time a commercial aircraft pushes back from a gate, 2 devices begin recording simultaneously. The first, the flight data recorder, the FDR, captures over 1,000 individual parameters, updating several times per second. Altitude, airspeed, heading, engine thrust, the position of every control surface. The second, the cockpit voice recorder, the CVR, captures the cockpit itself. Every word spoken, every alarm triggered, every ambient sound that enters the microphone, the click of a switch, the rhythm of engines felt through the airframe, the sound of a crew member clearing his throat 40 minutes before everything goes wrong. These devices are built to survive what the aircraft cannot. They withstand impact forces of 3,400 times the force of gravity. They survive fire at 1,100 degrees Celsius for 1 hour. They transmit an acoustic beacon from 6,000 meters underwater for 30 days. They are painted bright orange, so search teams can find them in wreckage fields stretching across mountainsides and ocean floors. They are the most important objects on any aircraft, not because of what they do during the flight, because of what they hold after it ends. The people who listen to these recordings are not grief counselors. They are not psychologists. They are engineers, former pilots, air traffic controllers, scientists who understand, with precise technical language, exactly why metal fails, why systems cascade, and why aircraft fall out of the sky. The National Transportation Safety Board employs a specialized group of cockpit voice recorder specialists whose function is to extract, process, and analyze cockpit voice recordings after major accidents. By federal law, access to the raw audio is restricted to a precise list of people: the cockpit voice recorder specialist, the investigator in charge, a representative from the Federal Aviation Administration, a representative from the airline, and a representative from the pilots' union. Everyone else receives a transcript, words on paper, the content without the voice. There is a reason for this distinction. A transcript tells you what was said. The recording tells you how it was said. The half-second hesitation before a critical call. The steadiness of a voice that has no right to be steady. The moment a captain's tone shifts, almost imperceptibly, from authority to something else. In accident investigation, these details are the difference between a theory and a conclusion. Before playback begins, everyone in the room signs legal documentation. What is heard here is protected under federal statute. It cannot be shared. It exists, legally, only within these walls. Then the headphones go on, and the first thing investigators hear is never the crash. It is always the beginning, the pre-flight checks, the casual exchange between a captain and first officer who trust each other completely, the sound of an aircraft coming to life, a normal day beginning normally. Investigators cannot skip ahead. They listen in real time, from the first minute, because somewhere in that ordinary professional conversation, in those routine checklists, in that unremarkable exchange between people who had no idea what was coming, somewhere in there is the first thread of what will eventually unravel. March 27th, 1977, Los Rodeos Airport, Tenerife, Canary Islands. A thick Atlantic fog has settled over the runway, reducing visibility to less than 300 meters. The control tower cannot see the runway threshold from its windows. The aircraft on the field cannot see each other. A terrorist bomb at Las Palmas has diverted dozens of aircraft to this smaller island airport. The taxiways are congested beyond capacity. Aircraft are using the main runway itself as a taxiway to reach their takeoff positions. On the runway, a KLM Boeing 747 sits at the threshold, engines running. In the cockpit, Captain Jacob Veldhuisen van Zanten, KLM's most celebrated 747 pilot, the face of their advertising campaigns, a figure of such institutional authority that junior crew members did not question him, pushes the throttles forward. He has not received takeoff clearance. His first officer notices. He says something, once, quietly. Van Zanten eases the throttles back for a moment, then pushes them forward again. The four engines accelerate to take off thrust, their sound building across the fog-covered field. At the other end of the runway, invisible in the gray, a Pan Am Boeing 747 is still taxiing. Its crew has missed their designated exit and is still on the active surface. Captain Victor Grubbs sees the landing lights of the KLM jet emerging from the fog at 160 knots, and he speaks the last words captured on his cockpit voice recorder. There he is. Look at him. Goddamn, that son of a bitch is coming. 583 people died in the collision and fire that followed. It remains the deadliest accident in the history of commercial aviation. When investigators analyzed the cockpit voice recorder recordings from both aircraft, they found something that would change aviation forever. The accident had not been caused by mechanical failure. It had been caused, in significant part, by 4 words of ambiguous radio communication. When the KLM crew reported the words, "We are now at takeoff," the control tower interpreted it as a position statement. The tower heard it as "We are holding at the takeoff position." The KLM crew meant it as a departure announcement. They meant "We are taking off now." 4 words, 2 interpretations, 583 lives. From that room, from those hours of careful listening, came the foundation of modern cockpit communication: standardized phraseology, the elimination of ambiguous terminology from critical transmissions, the requirement that takeoff clearance be explicit, read back, and confirmed before any movement begins. Every pilot alive today speaks differently in a cockpit because of what was heard in that room. Back to September 2nd, 1998. Swissair Flight 111 has been airborne for 53 minutes, cruising at 33,000 feet over the dark water south of Nova Scotia. In the cockpit, Captain Zimmerman and First Officer Stephen Lowe are managing a routine overnight crossing. The passengers behind them are settling into the rhythms of a long night flight, blankets pulled up, reading lights switched off, the cabin dimming towards sleep. Then one of them notices a smell. Not smoke exactly, something electrical, something warm in a place where warmth has no business being. The cockpit voice recorder captures what follows with clinical precision. 2 experienced pilots work methodically through their emergency procedures, making correct decisions at every step, communicating clearly with air traffic control at Moncton Center, beginning a fuel dump to reduce landing weight, and turning north toward Halifax Stanfield International Airport, 14 minutes away across the dark water. They had time. They had a plan. They were doing everything correctly. What they could not see was the ceiling above their heads. Inside the narrow cavity between the cockpit ceiling panels and the outer skin of the aircraft, an electrical arc had ignited the metallized insulation lining the ceiling. The fire was spreading through the aircraft's interior, moving along the wiring runs, invisible behind the panels, advancing faster than the emergency procedures could account for. The last 6 minutes of the Swissair 111 cockpit voice recorder are the sound of a cockpit being consumed from above. Electrical systems dropped offline in sequence, instrument displays going dark one by one as the fire reached their power supplies. The audio quality itself degraded as the aircraft's electrical architecture failed. 2 men in a cockpit filling with smoke over black water in an aircraft dying around them faster than they could respond. All 229 people died when the aircraft hit the Atlantic at 300 knots, 11 nautical miles southwest of Peggy's Cove, Nova Scotia. The investigation found that the insulation material used in the Swissair aircraft, used in thousands of aircraft worldwide, did not meet the flammability standards regulators had assumed it met. It was quietly replaced across the global fleet. No press conference, no public announcement. Somewhere, on flights that departed in the years after 1998, passengers watched films on in-flight entertainment systems lined with different materials. They did not know. They did not need to know. The people in the room had listened, and the world had quietly changed around them. June 1st, 2009. Air France Flight 447 pushes back from Rio de Janeiro with 228 people on board, bound for Paris. At 2:14 in the morning, cruising at 38,000 feet over the equatorial Atlantic, the aircraft's pitot tubes, the small probes measuring airspeed, ice over simultaneously. The autopilot disconnects. The flight management system goes silent. The captain is not in the cockpit. He is in the crew rest area for his scheduled break, leaving two co-pilots at the controls. One of the co-pilots pulls back on his side stick, the input that raises the aircraft's nose. In the confusion of the moment, with unreliable speed indications and a suddenly disconnected autopilot, it is an instinctive response. The nose rises, the airspeed decays. The aircraft enters an aerodynamic stall and begins to fall. The stall warning activates. It activates 75 times over the next 4 minutes. The co-pilot holds the back pressure on the side stick. The aircraft falls. 38,000 feet, 35,000, 30,000. The ocean rising toward them at 10,000 feet per minute. The stall warning cycling through its alert sequence. The instruments showing data the crew cannot reconcile into a coherent picture of what the aircraft is doing or why. The captain returns to the cockpit. He stands behind his crew, his hands on the backs of their seats, and looks at the instrument panel, the altitude unwinding, the airspeed unreliable, the aircraft in a near vertical descent. He has been awake for less than a minute. He has less than 30 seconds. His last recorded words were 4 words long. But what's happening? All 228 people died. The wreckage lay on the ocean floor at 3,900 meters for 23 months before being recovered by remote-operated vehicles working in total darkness at the edge of their operational depth. The investigators who finally listened to the AF447 cockpit voice recorder did not just hear a crash. They heard the sound of 3 people who did not understand what their aircraft was doing. They heard 75 warnings that were not acted on correctly, not because the crew was incompetent, but because the situation had exceeded the boundaries of their training in ways no one had anticipated, in conditions no simulator had replicated, in the middle of the night over an ocean with no reference points and no one else within radio range. AF447 rewrote the global standards for manual flight training in automated aircraft. It changed how every airline in the world trains its pilots to respond to unreliable airspeed indications. It changed the conversation about automation dependency in ways still being debated in cockpits and training centers today. There is no official clinical name for what happens to investigators over years of this work. The closest approximation is secondary traumatic stress, the damage that accumulates not from experiencing trauma directly, but from sustained, repeated exposure to the trauma of others. One former investigator described the adaptation this way. You learn to separate. The voice in the headphones is data. The moment you allow it to become a person, you cannot do the job. But the separation is never complete. Investigators describe a consistent pattern. The final seconds of a recording, the last alarm, the impact, the abrupt end of the audio are manageable. They are the conclusion of a technical sequence. What resists processing is the beginning. Captain Zimmerman, 53 minutes before impact, his voice carrying the easy authority of a man completely at home in his aircraft. The Air France co-pilots, in the quiet of the overnight Atlantic crossing, the autopilot holding the aircraft steady, talking about something ordinary and forgettable. These are the moments that stay. Not the end of the recording, the beginning, the sound of people who did not know. Federal law in the United States prohibits the public release of cockpit voice recordings. The NTSB publishes transcripts, words on paper. The recordings remain sealed. The reasoning is carefully constructed. If pilots believed their every word might one day be broadcast publicly, they would self-censor. Self-censorship in a cockpit kills people. The law chose the living over the grieving. Families of victims have challenged this in court. Some have won the right to listen, once, in a controlled setting, with no recording devices permitted. They sit at the long table, they put on the headphones, they hear their person's voice, sometimes for the last time in their lives. What they are permitted to take from that room is the memory of what they heard. Nothing else. Every significant change in aviation safety over the past 50 years has a cockpit voice recording at its origin. Crew resource management, the framework governing how pilots communicate authority and challenge each other's decisions, was born from the Tenerife recordings. The concept that a first officer has the professional obligation to question a captain's decision, regardless of seniority, came from a room where investigators listened to a first officer who questioned once, quietly, and was not heard. Flammability standards for aircraft interior materials were rewritten because of what burned above the heads of the Swissair Flight 111 crew. Manual flight training protocols were rebuilt at every major airline in the world because of what 3 pilots did not understand over the equatorial Atlantic. None of these changes were announced with fanfare. They were absorbed quietly into training programs and maintenance standards and regulatory frameworks, and they began saving lives in ways that are, by definition, invisible. You cannot point to the flight that did not crash. You cannot name the passengers who did not die. You can only know that somewhere in the long declining curve of aviation's fatal accident rate, there is a number that represents the return on the investment made by the people who listened. There is a word investigators use in private that outsiders rarely hear: gift. The recordings are a gift. From the dead to the living. From the crews who did not survive to the crews who will fly tomorrow. Every hour spent in that room with padded walls and a long steel table, listening to the last moments of people who did not come home, all of it is a transaction, a transfer of knowledge purchased at the highest possible price. Somewhere right now, an aircraft is cruising at 38,000 feet. The engines are running smoothly. The crew is talking about the weather ahead, about the descent profile, about something ordinary and forgettable. The cockpit voice recorder is running, capturing every word, every sound, storing it in a loop that overwrites itself every 2 hours, keeping only the most recent, keeping only what might one day be needed. And somewhere on the ground, the people who have spent their careers in that room in Washington, D.C. are hoping, with everything they have, that they will never need to hear this one. The black box does not record death. It records everything that came before it so that we can make sure it never comes again.